Me. Hi, everybody.
All right, and the recording has started, and whenever you're ready to start, Mary, thank you.
Yeah, hi, can you guys hear me? Cool. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. Thanks everyone for inviting me to speak today. Just to give a quick introduction, I'm Mary. I think first off, if I'm gonna go through like the list of maybe my bio, I'd say I'm a New Yorker, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a girlfriend, and runners somewhere in there. But I think as I've gotten older, I try not to have that be my first buzzword. And I think it's just because I've realized that what really makes me proud of being a runner, what really makes being a runner fun, it's kind of all these other parts of me, such as my relationships, my friendships, and even my work-life balance. Otherwise, I'm the community manager for New York City for the sports apparel company, or running apparel company, specifically Tracksmith. And I'm also a part-time employee of New York Road Runners, which is the organization here in the city that puts on New York City Marathon. I work in virtual products, and if you've seen the virtual marathon that's gone up, and some of the other events that we've been doing, such as some of the 5K, I'm a part of the team that helps get those up on the website, get them ready, brainstorms exactly what we're doing. And so that's been a role I've taken on over the last maybe 6 months or so, and it's been really fun to, have all these roles that are within the running world, but not maybe being the runner exclusively. I kind of get to give back, and then I also focus on my own training too. So, hi. And I kind of defer to you guys how you want to structure today's chat. I'm happy to monologue, happy to do a Q&A, whatever you guys feel will kind of get the most out of today's call.
So the chat should be open and everyone can see. If you put a question in there, I can also, yep. So Samantha Simmons asked, was it scary coming out with your story?
It was a little bit. I think it was such a whirlwind for me, the whole experience, and that I came out with my story, I think it was November 7th, 2019, and it had only been maybe like 5 weeks of working with Lindsay Krause of the New York Times before it came out. And during that time, the reason it had almost started was because my old coach was slapped with a ban from USA Anti-Doping. And that was almost such a big moment for me, because up until that point, I had always been in such denial about what my experience really was. And I think the reason was because I always looked at it as my fault and my problem and my issue, and in a very almost defensive to my old program light, in a very self-critical way. And when I read through that report, which is maybe like 270 pages, there were moments that stuck out to me where, the report would say my old coach told athletes something, but that was a lie. And it was like highlighted. And I would be sitting there like, I was told that lie. And every time I hit one of those moments, it was like both a punch in the gut, and also like the rose-colored glasses were just continuing to break. And by the time I read through the whole thing, I started the process of maybe really looking at things how it had happened. And so I think because this wasn't a long time coming in certain ways, like I had been in denial for maybe 4 or 5 years at that point, once I was ready to share, nothing was going to stop me. And so I sat down with my parents and I told them you know, for years they had been like, Mary, I think you're not seeing this maybe in the light that it happened. But I also hadn't always shared the whole story with them. And so I sat them down, I told them everything, and I said, I'm going to share this. I've reached out to Lindsay Grouse, and I've known she's helped other athletes before. I just want to see where this is going to go. And I told them I will probably never get another running sponsorship. Running from here on will probably always be something I have to pursue on my own. But I want to do this because if this helps one other kid, I'm going to. And I think telling them was more scary than telling anybody else, because certain parts of my story I had never really shared with them. They knew I had had disordered eating. My mom knew a couple years later that I had been cutting. But a lot of the story that you saw in like a short 7-minute clip, it took me 4 to 5 years to figure out that that was something that was not only bad, but something that I had to share. So.
Thank you. Michaela asked, when did you officially stop being a Nike-sponsored athlete?
Yeah, so I was signed with Nike in the fall of 2013. So that was the fall of my high school senior year. And then I was with the Oregon Project in Portland until my freshman year of college. So like until May 2015. And then I stayed on the team until a year later, or July 2016. But I stayed a Nike-sponsored athlete until December 2018. I no longer ran for the program, but I had signed a 5-year contract, during which they terminated me at one point and then like re-signed me. But I was with them until December 2018, and then since then I've not been with the company.
How do you think coaches can go about being supportive of female athletes, based on any previous experience they have, or just as a runner in general?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest things that I recommend to coaches is that, there's a level of humility that every coach that's a great coach has, in that they know they're not an expert in everything. You can be the greatest running coach in the world, and that does not mean you're going to be able to Google your way to a nutrition degree. That does not mean you're going to be able to Google your way to a sports medicine degree. And so, sometimes coaches come to me feeling really guilty. They're like, I'm not an expert in this. I don't know what to do. What do I do? And I think the biggest thing is to sit kids down, whether it's the beginning of the year, the first time you're working with them, and say, I'm not an expert in these fields. I want you to feel comfortable talking to me, open with me about anything that you're going through. But maybe, through the years of working with different athletes, you've been able to kind of learn about whether they're local or, well-respected people within different fields, such as sports medicine, nutrition, sports psychology, and just always kind of have this recommended list of people that athletes can go to, so that if a kid is open with you saying, I'm really struggling, or you notice somebody is struggling, you can either reach out to the parent, reach out to the kid, and say, I know I'm not an expert in this, but here are some people that I really respect. I know they're amazing, and I want you to be able to get the help that you can. So I think there's always that side of it. And then I think the second thing is just, be a little self-aware. I think as coaches, it's very easy, and I know as somebody who has done some coaching over the years, it's very easy for me to project myself onto my athletes. So for example, if I think, a certain way, I might assume the athlete is worried about that as well. And I think sometimes coaches can almost inadvertently say things, even if it's something subtle, like that girl looks really good. She looks really fit, really ready to go. And it might to you be a flippant comment, but to the athlete, that might actually be something they kind of internalize and then think, oh, they think they look good. What about me? And, you know, especially younger athletes, it's easy for them to kind of go down a mental rabbit hole. So I always just recommend that, you know, be open early with your athletes and say, if I ever say something, you know, you have the right to talk back to me. Catch me in the moment, you know, say, hey, I don't think that's appropriate. And also catch yourself, like hold yourself accountable for that as well. And, you know, try to take those even just like subtle and maybe, you know, subconscious, your own fears and thoughts out of your vocabulary.
Lindsay asked, what is the thing that keeps you running and what do you love most about the sport despite some of the ugly parts?
I think the first thing is just I love actually running. Like I love how that feels. I love what that, you know, feels in my head, feels in my body. I just like, I feel I was, you know, like I feel we're kind of all born to run. And if you're, you know, able to find joy and just, and almost freedom within running, then that's one of the most beautiful things. So for me, that's what's always made it so that I want to come back, because even after injuries, even after times away, like sometimes I just need to run to reframe my thoughts. And I think just also the community that I've built. I've got a lot of really great friends in the sport, people who are my long distance teammates, people who are my nearby teammates, and, you know, on a good day, bad day, they get me up and help me get out the door.
Amelia asked, what is the best piece of advice you've gotten from a coach or a teammate?
I think one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten from probably my coach is the fact that I, you know, and also a teammate has told me this as well. You know, I've had some injuries over the years, and they were, some of them were caused from like disordered eating issues where my bone density had decreased and I was predisposed to bone injuries. But I also recognize that some of my other injuries happened because I was almost trying to get back too quickly. And I would cross train like an animal. I would go so hard in the pool or on the bike or on the elliptical. And within a month, something little would flare up. It usually wasn't necessarily like a big deal, but like maybe I kind of like irritated my calf or irritated my quad and then would have to take a week a little down. And I'd get very frustrated. And I think one thing my coach and teammates have since always reminded me is that just because you get very aerobically fit, that doesn't mean you're running fit. And I think I used to be very hard on myself because I would look at some of these other athletes who would, you know, be hurt all year and then suddenly like make an Olympic team, and I'd be like, what the hell happened? And so I think for me, it's this, I can't compare how other people's bodies respond to different stimulus. I just have to work on myself. And if I need a little bit more time to get back into running, that's okay. So I think just always making sure you're prioritizing yourself, you're doing what your body needs, then you're going to be great.
And Michaela asked, how has your training or running life changed since joining the Tracksmith team?
It's honestly been a really positive change for me. Before working for Tracksmith, I had started my NYR position in February. So I was already like, you know, had a part-time job. And before then, I had either been in school or been a part of this like running studio within the city. And I've always found that I do better with my running when that's not my whole life, when I kind of have other things to do and maybe a schedule to build my running around. Like in high school, I had my high school classes, so I couldn't, you know, sit around all day and be like, I was 2 seconds off that 800 split or whatever the heck you wanted to be moping about. I had to just get to class, go to English, Latin, whatever class I had, and kind of put running to the side. And my Tracksmith role has really helped me define that again and have things that I feel more motivated than when I go out to work out or run or whatever I'm going to be doing that day, because I realize like I have something else almost to hold on to and to always kind of pull me out of a funk or re-motivate me. So it just kind of like helps that, you know, circle of continuing to feel like I'm more and more in love with the sport. And also they're an incredibly supportive group where, You know, they value me more as a person than as a runner. And I think that's something that within the professional sport, I've never found that with really anybody besides a couple friends in the sport and like my agent. But otherwise, most people are very kind of all about like you as a product rather than you as a person. So it's been really life-changing having people see me otherwise.
Catherine asked, was it difficult to have the courage to leave Nike?
You know, I think for me, it was really hard to like, I think for, you know, during those denial years, it was hard to, because even though I knew there was a problem, I always put it on myself. So I didn't think anybody else was, I thought I was the problem. So leaving anything, even though I knew it was better for me, since I thought I was bad, I almost just felt negative about the whole situation. Well, now I almost feel weirdly less negative about it because I'm no longer fully blaming myself for the situation. And even though everything still happened, it was still negative, it was still sad and upsetting, it's almost empowering to have this reframing of mindset to realize, you know, I have taken some agency back within the story and I've stood up for myself and I've been strong. And therefore, I almost feel weirdly more positive now about everything than maybe I did 2 years ago when I was still with them.
Mason asked, would you say your story is a rare occurrence, or is there a large uncovered amount of similar cases for professional runners?
The latter, for sure. I mean, I was on a team that, you know, it happened more to a couple of us, and we were both women, but like the other athlete never came forward and they denied my account. Past athletes who were on the team have already come forward and said the same thing happened to me. There are some other groups within the country that, you know, professional running is a really small world. Like we all kind of know each other and we kind of know who the good guys are. We kind of know who the bad guys are. You know, there are some other people who are in similar situations. And I was hoping that maybe a few more people, you know, who even had like kind of written to me after the fact would maybe step forward and, you know, share their experiences and protect the next swatch of runners coming forward. But that I know in Britain it happened and in some, you know, other sports it's been happening, but it's been a little bit slow to happen in professional track and field. And so I hope that continues to, you know, be an inspiration for some people to come forward. But yeah, I think, you know, I think this is something that's systemic across the board, whether it's professional, college, high school, middle school. You know, there's like the reason my story resonated with so many people was because rather than being a like strange story that people couldn't relate to, I was a mirror for many. And they looked at my story and realized that was me and therefore, you know, related. And I think that included the professional world.
What does your racing and training look like now?
So I'm not a sponsored athlete. I'm an employed athlete. So it's a little bit different in that my role is as a literal employee. Most professional runners are what you call independent contractors, which is essentially like a fancy like legal way to say that I didn't have health insurance, I wasn't protected by the company's HR department. You know, I was just on a contract. I could get cut, reduced, bonus, whenever they wanted based on the contract. And that was my extent of involvement within the company. Well, now I truly have a position. So I work full time. I'm, you know, mostly in part of their New York City activations, which is super fun, and anything that involves community involvement. And so even though I'm not sponsored, it's a better setup for me because I have a lot more protection, and it's something that I'm 24 today, but when I'm 44, I can still have this job. When I'm 54, I can still have this job. While being a sponsored athlete, there's more of shelf life. So I still consider myself professional, and I still consider myself a professional runner, but just not in the traditional sponsorship model.
Did you receive pushback from any former teammates directly or indirectly?
Yeah, definitely. Mostly indirectly because, so when I did the New York Times piece, you can't really go and just like accuse people of things and then have it posted. There has to be a lot more like background and having people corroborate your claims. So in order for really almost anything to get into the video, I had to have at least like 2 other people say, yes, we saw that happen. And so some people in advance have been reached out to and were asked, like, can you like confirm any of Mary's story? And usually it would be done in a way that was pretty like giving them the opportunity to be like off the record and, never have their name shared. And a lot of people said that never happened. And for one person in particular that really, they were probably the one person who I was like staying in touch with at that point. And when they did that, it was really hard on me, honestly. I think for me, it was just like, that kind of ended our like relationship and friendship at that point. Because for me, like, they had been going through the same stuff I was, and for them to deny it, I just found honestly really hurtful. But, former teammates did, as a result, push back, but then others stepped forward and was like, yeah, that happened. I saw the whole thing, or it happened to me, or, that sort of thing. But it was the people who denied, that was, pretty crummy.
And what is your favorite spot in New York to run?
So I recently moved just a few weeks ago. For the last year and a half, I've been living down on St. Mark's in the East Village, and I recently moved up to the Upper West Side. But so, maybe someday I'll become like a Central Park fiend. I love the park, don't get me wrong. But I think because I grew up in Westchester, up in Bronxville, New York, Van Cortlandt Park's still like the OG for me. You got the track, you got the flats, you got the hills, you got Lloyd's Carrot Cake Shop right across the street. I mean, like, I'm set. So I think that'll always be my favorite spot in, the general city to run. And then Manhattan, I'll be cliche and say the park.
Awesome. What changes do you think should be made in how pro running works in the US and or the world?
I think there has to be more athlete protections put into place. I think that's the biggest thing, where as it stands right now, you're in a very vulnerable position. Not with all companies, but with some. Some companies that do the sponsorship model have it so that there's more of a safety net put in place. But a lot of them force you to run with a sponsored coach for the company. And often there's not many options. There's maybe 1 or 2 people. So if you end up having a negative experience with them and they only want you to run with a sponsored coach, where do you go? You're stuck. You either have to go to another company, but if you're still on contract, that's not necessarily an opportunity. And then you're kind of left in this limbo position. As athletes, there's no HR team. So if you're having a negative experience with your coach, you're not contacting your HR rep saying, hey, I'm having a conflict with a fellow employee, because not, or in my case, I wasn't, they were an employee. So there's no one I can really turn to. So I think as, the professional, running model continues both worldwide and nationally, there has to be a reconsideration of what it means to be on a contract. And I think my personal opinion is that it should shift more to an employee model. And even if it's something where there's still, you're still technically an independent contractor, but have the opportunity to use the HR team, have the opportunity to use, maybe like even just like professional training. So like maybe do internships during the fall when you're training a little bit less, or it's not as intense, or have the opportunity to, kind of work with different groups within the company, so that it's not this like only one person is your relationship with the company, and if that doesn't go well, you're kind of left on the street sort of situation. So I think there's a lot of changes that have to be made. And I think it's important to also recognize that that model would also potentially reduce the amount of performance enhancing drugs that find their way into our sport. Because if you feel you have to train with one coach and the situation is taking a turn in that direction, I think you should have more of an ability to be able to speak out and say there's an issue.
And what advice would you give to your younger runner self?
I think what I've always kind of thought I would almost maybe more tell, like, my pre-growing pro self is, like, remember who really loves you, and make sure you don't put your whole self into one community exclusively. I think as younger people, there's such a need to belong, and there's this like craving to feel that you have one community. But the truth is, the people who I almost feel do the best, whether it's in sport or just in life, are the people who have like many different circles that they're a part of. They have their family, they have their school friends, they have their teammates, they have their coworkers. They almost have this both literal and also figurative diversity of people that they're a part of. And so therefore, if they're, in my case, I think because of my situation, I was really only being given the opportunity to go pro or go to one specific university where I pretty much would have been a part of the same program. So had that happened, I was probably always going to have a big reckoning with the team that I was a part of. But had I made sure to always have a strong group of friends in college, really stayed closely in touch with my family, made sure to keep in touch with my high school friends, and really just kept this community of people who didn't really care that I ran, who weren't obsessed with my weight, who didn't care what the times, I performed on the track were, who I could almost turn back to and say, I'm struggling, I think I would have been able to get through my experience much healthier, much happier, and maybe quicker than I did. And so it's just to make sure that you don't almost pigeonhole yourself into this just one space. You're a person of probably many different interests, many different passions, and you can express yourself in that way through the many different friends and groups that you're a part of.
And what was your best running experience?
I would say probably, I think just in general, being on any world team I was on, whether it was World Juniors or World Seniors, I think like the racing was awesome, obviously really fun, but I met some of like my closest friends through experiences like that. Like my roommate back in 2012 for World Juniors is now on the NJNY team, Danny, and like we're super close friends still. And I think having relationships like that and different people who I can always like feel are a part of my, running team in a way, that's probably the best part.
Um, since your experience with Nike, have other brands approached you for sponsorships? And if so, did you consider these offers or did you see them as completely off the table?
Um, Mostly the brands that approached me after I shared my story were non-traditional brands. So most of the brands weren't like your classic, this is your contract, it's 2 years, we're going to produce you. If you run crappy, that's all we consider you. None of those companies really were looking at me, and I think probably we know why. But I'm no longer really looking for sponsorship because of my relationship with Tracksmith. They are like, again, I'm an employee, but since they're running apparel, I would never sign a contract with anybody else because I want to represent the brand that I actually work for.
What was your decision-making process like when you chose to go pro out of high school?
I think there were a few things kind of at play. I think one, like, I was really, if I wanted to stay in like Nike's good, maybe like in a good place in Nike's head, I was really only like allowed to go to one school. And I was told you can live wherever you want, but you really have to go there. And so when I took my visit to that school, I just felt it wasn't really my place. It wasn't really the school that I wanted to go to. I didn't feel kind of at home there. Didn't really make sense for me. And I at that time, I wanted to have a successful running career. I wanted to be, continuing to improve year after year. And so to me, the idea of cutting off the coaching relationship that had at that point gotten, at least in my mind, gotten me to the world championships, I wanted to not burn those bridges. And so to me, it was like between that school and going pro looked a lot more fun. I really liked the school that I went to my first year out in Portland, University of Portland. It was maybe more my speed than the other school I was being encouraged to go to. And I also at the time thought that the other people on my pro team were my friends. It's very sad, but I did. And so to me, I was just like, oh, I'll go to a school that I like a little bit more. I'll hang out with my friends, and that'll be it. And unfortunately, I think the school side of things really was good, but the team wasn't really what I thought it was. Because when you're separated by 3,000 miles, people can look a lot more glamorous than when you see them every single day. And so that was kind of my choice. It was kind of like, either I go to the one school, go pro, or I totally cut off my relationship with the team I'm a part of, and I just wasn't ready to do that.
Has the pandemic impacted your running routine or training?
I would say initially we were at my family's place for a while, which was definitely just different because at the time we were planning on moving, but things kind of got pushed back a bit. And so we were there for a while, and I thought it was almost nice personally. I think my boyfriend would say a little less so, but I think it was just good to kind of mix up where you were running, where you were training, but I definitely was missing having people to run with. But now we're back in the city. We moved 3 weeks ago. And that was definitely an adventure, but now that we almost feel situated, it feels more like back to normal, even though we're in a totally new location and nothing's normal. We feel more settled.
Danielle asked what your favorite pre and post meet meal is, and also says that you're amazing.
Thank you. I think for me, it depends on what time the race is, but I've always been a pre-race pancake person. Pancakes or waffles are awesome. I think gives you a lot of just energy, and I would usually eat them 3 or 4 hours before the race because I can get almost upset stomach before just normal good nerve level stuff. So I eat well in advance. And then afterwards, I don't know, in high school I was a big milkshake fiend. post-race, and now I feel like my elderly self is getting like more lactose intolerant, but I'm totally going to be like crushing more milkshakes post-race, because who cares? Have fun. You earned it. And also, you never earn food. I take that back. That is not a thing. I hate when people say that, and I just did it. I'm sorry.
How do you think nutrition and our weight should be discussed on running teams?
I think it should be very like an open talk early on and explain that this is something we can always talk about. I think a lot of people feel very uncomfortable talking about weight, because for years it's just been, I mean, like forever, it's almost been this taboo. And I think it's important that it's openly discussed. And whether that's, you know, maybe inviting like a local nutritionist to early on in the season, come talk to the track team and just like, you know, have a like open dialogue about like what is nutrition for training and what's healthy, you know, and what's maybe unhealthy, such as warning signs like amenorrhea or, you know, different stuff like that. And so I think like having resources for kids and, you know, even if it's just like kind of easy things like, you know, if you're in high school, you shouldn't be on a diet. Like if you're trying to do any sort of specific like weight loss diet program, I'm telling you right now, that's not the best thing for you. If you're like an athlete and already training hard, already running hard, you should be focusing on fueling rather than losing weight. And so I think kind of having that be like an early on and continued reminder that your bodies are growing, your bodies are developing, we're fueling you to train hard, but also continue to grow, continue to build, and have like a lifelong healthiness.
Awesome. And would you sign with Nike again?
I mean, so after my piece came out, I truthfully sort of expected the broader company to be like, oh my God, whoa, that's pretty bad. Like, sorry. And instead that did not happen. Very much the opposite happened. I don't know if any of you have watched the Lance Armstrong documentaries, but in that it was made very clear that certain companies, Nike, was defending, attacking anybody who said anything negative about him, until the second things really fell apart, and then they had nothing to do with it. And in many ways, that was kind of like watching those recently. I was like, oh man, I'm in the attack part. And I think there are many people within Nike who were really upset by the story, and there was even a walkout after my piece came out because people within the company who worked there were very upset at how the broader company were responding to my piece, or like as an aggressor. And so like, that's not to say that like, there's some awesome people who work there. Like, that's awesome. But I think how the company is structured right now, if they're going to respond to my story as like a broader company like that, and also the people who are currently in charge of sports marketing are not good people. And so I have no interest in working with them. So as long as those people are there, you know, I wouldn't have anything to do with them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and speaking with us. It's just been so amazing to hear from you, both from the article and now today. And we give people one more chance if they have a question that they want to type into the chat. Kate Carpenter asks, what's your favorite running condition?
In terms of weather, I would say I love it when it's like a little bit drizzly. I think it's that Irish blood in me. Like, I like it when it's, you know, maybe like cool, like in that, like, it's not cold, it's not hot, like you're in your 50s to 60s, and just like a little bit of a drizzle, I think is really nice, especially for a long run. Yes, my hair maybe doesn't like it so much, but I think like the bigger my hair gets, probably like the longer the miles of the run. And so it almost feels like once you get home, you're like, I probably worked pretty hard based on the size of my hair. But yeah, I would say that's probably my favorite weather condition.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, congrats on the move. We hope you're enjoying the new spot and all the runs, and wish you all the best. And for our Granite State runners, we are going to have a video featuring some of your favorite JCs and Coach Sanborn on foam rolling. So we'll get into that in just a second.
Coach in Granite State running camp. I coach at Westfield High School in Connecticut. We do have 2 camp alumni and concerts with me now, so you guys can introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Griffin Grabowski. I was for 2 years. This is my 4th year as a JC from Weathersfield when I go to UConn. I'm Evan McNeese. I was a camper for 3 years. I'm going from Weathersfield and going into my freshman year.
We're going to be doing foam rollers and sticks today. There's several different varieties that you can actually use. This is actually a sample of a stick. There's a couple different varieties you can do this. You can actually use your rolling pin that you use in the kitchen at home if you really want to. We also have smooth rollers, which is what most people recommend for beginners. And there are texture rollers as well. And I don't actually have that actually also vibrate. So use your discretion as to which one actually is best for you. You can get those online. We actually got about a dozen of them for $20 through Amazon a couple years ago. You can also go to your local running stores or a good store to find rollers that you all have them. So you shop around, there's plenty of running stores you can choose from. We're going to go through with these 2 demonstrating what exercises you can do with these rollers and sticks. We're going to go through it pretty quickly. Most of you don't have a roller at home, so we're going to actually just demonstrate and you can get a roller and probably get an idea of what you're actually supposed to be doing. We're actually going to start out with the calves today. So if you guys can get down onto the ground. Generally, you want to get about half of the muscle while you're actually doing these. And then you actually want to move on to the second half of the muscle. You usually want to start up to the top of the muscle, meaning the closest to the actual trunk. So Griffin, you're actually going to be starting a little close to the knee and then down, and then you're going to move down to the middle to the ankle. Want to go for 1 to 2 minutes on each body part before you actually move on. There are a couple ways you can actually focus on this. You can actually want to leave as much body weight as possible on the actual muscle that you're actually working. So one way you can adapt that by actually putting more weight on than what Griffin is doing right now is actually put the second leg on top. Some of you may find that that actually is a little bit painful, so use your discretion. You want to go to your threshold. Again, a beginner is probably going to want to use a smooth roller instead of a textured one like what this one is. For the stick, it's actually pretty easy. Evan is using that one right now. Again, you want to start up at the top of the muscle closer to the trunk and then move on down for this as you get further along. All right, next one is actually going to be the hamstrings. Let's start up at the top again. The other thing you want to be careful of when you're actually using foam rollers is you don't want to go over the actual joints at the end of the muscle. You actually just want to focus on the muscle itself. All right, the next one is actually going to be the quadriceps, which are on the front of the thigh. This is actually a little bit of an awkward position, and you might find it's a little bit easier to use with the stick like what Evan has. You got it right out, Griffin. And again, use your discretion as to which one is actually going to work best for you. A stick will accomplish the same thing as a foam roller. And then you can move down to the lower end of the muscle. All right, the next one is going to be what's called your adductor, which is actually the inside of the thigh. It's another one that's a little bit of an awkward position. You might find it's a little bit easier to use the stick like what Evan is using. And Griffin has some pretty good positioning on this, and you can see how this one gets to be a little bit awkward and might be a little bit more comfortable to use your stick. All right, let's switch over to the IT band, which is on the outside of the thigh. This is another one that tends to be a little bit awkward. Watch out, Griffin, don't bump into Evan. This is one of the body parts. This and the calf are the two body parts that tend to cause the most pain if you rollers, if you experience any at all. Some people do, but most don't. You're going to find there's no wrong time to do these. You can actually do these as part of your warm-up or your cool-down. We typically do it as part of our cool-down, usually only 2 to 3 days per week. There are some people that use it every day. Evan's actually one of those. All right, guys, let's move on to the back. All right, Evan, if you could drop that for a moment and turn around. What you want to do on the back is you want to actually go this way. You don't want to be going across this way because you want to keep your roller away from the actual spine. There's too many nerve endings in the spine coming out of the spinal column, so you want to avoid that as much as you possibly can. So the lower back is what Griffin is doing right now is good, and Evan, if you could actually get the upper back. Another trick you can actually do for the back is if you have a hard ball at home, and this will work really well with the hamstrings and the calves as well. So a baseball or softball or lacrosse ball actually work pretty well. You can put yourself up against a wall, and I recommend a brick wall if you do this, and roll against that instead. You can actually place the ball on the ground also. So there's some alternatives out there. Use your imagination a little bit if you don't want to have your own roller, because there are some other things you can use. All right, am I missing any body parts? You can use gluteals. Gluteals. Gluteals, you can turn a little bit onto the side. Be careful you don't go over the actual hip joint. If you do this, you can actually just sit on it as well. So either one of those will actually work. Griffin, if you could actually turn your whole gluteals, both gluteals onto the roller. Yep. And again, you want to go for 1 to 2 minutes per body part. And we're moving through this pretty quickly because this is just a demonstration. Anything else we're missing? I think we got it all. Okay, and that's it for our demo. Thank you, Griffin and Evan.